Okay, and so now we're back here. So we've sort of introduced this problem between police and stuff right there, and we'll deviate a little bit and we'll talk about this need for record keeping. So when we have governments, right? There's a reason why records exist. We'll do like a personal example real quick. So for me, if I keep my own personal record, right, so I have a journal, right, where all my thoughts and dreams are written down, as well as silly short stories that I write to myself, and maybe some interesting little things that I see from day to day, right? That is an example of a journal or a record of my point of view, how I see things, what was going through my head, stuff like that, right? And this will also seem happen, right, for, presidential diaries for people who keep them. And, we also see, royal diaries as well. I think like Queen Elizabeth, is an example of that, right? We also see, this occurs with, like photography for photos, right? Because like me, I like to keep photos, right? And they can be really powerful in documenting things like the civil rights movement, protests in Vietnam during the Vietnam War, the riot insurrection at the Capitol building and so on, right? And so when we think about what records do, then they account, they make an account for an event, through the eyes of certain people, right? They're certainly filtered. So, they're filtered like that. And because of this, account or event, right, this is, can be something, depending on the state, because it varies by states on how public they are, but, becomes a matter of public record, right? So when we think about, exactly, what does this lead to when we have these public records, why does the government have that, right? Well, the government has this in place, right, because they are ultimately, accountable to the public, right? Regardless of party, there'll be people who work for government for ages, regardless of who's in power. But we're accountable to the public. I am a state government employee, technically, so all of my emails and classes and stuff like Blackboard and stuff like that, all my personnel files and stuff like that is a matter of record, right? Sometimes it's just in for internal use. I don't think you could like get a public records request for my stuff, but I guess you could. Accountable to the accountable. That doesn't make any sense. But it's accountable to the public, right? And so we have these records in place in order to, have an event of what's going on, right? And to display patterns and decisions that were made, who said what when, what events went down, in what order, what precluded it, right? It's also a way of checking out history. So what were people thinking in the past as to what happened. And at the same time, right, it's also a way of correcting past abuses and problems. So if there was something that was, not right, what happened, what was it, what do we need to do to address it, right? But it can also be used to hold evidence of, a government record was, did fully comply with all laws, all proper stations, were followed, right? And so it's an evidence or compliance check. So the government can say, like, if they are taking someone's rights away in some form, or if there is the threat of possible abuse, right, it's to show that proper procedures were followed, right? And so there are, and this is not just because of a morally or ethically correct thing to do, although it kind of is, right? But it's also it is there are financial stakes associated with this kind of thing, right? So what this creates then, right, is that when it comes to police and why there's so much existing record keeping, right? So police and record keeping is to keep documents of complaints. It is to keep documents of encounters. It's to keep events of all that kind of stuff. So that, that the police can be held accountable, and, to justify decisions for arrest, or assault, or, whatever. And as a result of that, right, it is to ensure that action can be taken to commend or, in some cases, reprimand whoever, right? Because without having something to go by, you can just sort of like make up stuff, as you go, right? So this is why, it's really kind of important to have records in the first place, right? And so because there is this need to keep records and to keep things accountable, this is in part of the reason why there is sort of a push to have body-worn cameras by police officers, because this serves as a visual account of what happened in an event. So we'll talk a little bit more about that